Excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on understanding web accessibility. I am Irene Barry-Kirika, the founder and executive director of Enable. So we've done our best to be as accessible as possible. So we want to share with you what you need to do to make sure you can access information. We do have captions. We do have a sign language interpreter. And also we have a Q&A box where you can actually text any questions that you may have. Sarah, let's move to the next one. So our agenda for today will include just welcome and introductions to our panelists. We'll have a brief presentation from Shadi. At the same time, we'll have a session for questions and answers so that we can get a chance to interact with our participants. Enable was founded in 2009 with a simple mission to empower the blind and visually impaired in Africa through computer assistive technology. Over the last 10 years, Enable has established assistive technology labs in special schools for the blind in Kenya and enrolled more than 8,000 students. So for us, digital accessibility is everything we do every day. So it's important to have this conversation on web accessibility because most people are now offering their services and any form of communications through various websites or mobile applications. One key fact that I want everyone to remember is that more than 80 million people in Africa live with disabilities. So every time you have a website and it's not fully accessible to people with disabilities, you're leaving out a population of 80 million people. So we'll take a minute to take a short poll. And I just want everyone to just take 1 minute and answer this question. Do you know where to get help or information when it comes to web accessibility? You can choose yes or no, or I'm not sure. So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that question. Excellent. So 36% say yes, they know where to find information about accessibility. 36% say no, and 27% say they're not sure. So I'm going to introduce to you our supporting partner, and her name is Judy Brewer, who's the director of the Web Accessibility Initiative. She'll tell you what the Web Accessibility Initiative is all about, and it falls under the World Wide Web Consortium. So Judy, thanks for joining us today. It's very humbling to have you here. Please go ahead and share more information.
Thank you so much, Irene. And thank you for this opportunity to say a few words at the beginning of your Inclusive Design Africa 2020 webinar. Greetings from the World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative, and congratulations on today's webinar. I hope you are all safe and well. I appreciate this opportunity to connect with you by video conference at a time when international travel is so difficult. The web accessibility principles, resources, and experiences that you'll be learning about from Shadi Obazara and the panelists in today's webinar are a foundation not only for accessible design of web and mobile, but also for promoting accessibility of many other digital technologies that rely upon the web. Today, because of the coronavirus, online learning, telehealth, and more all must be accessible so that people with disabilities can access education, work, and healthcare online. Web accessibility provides a foundation for all of these. The Web Accessibility Initiative, which we call WAY for short, produces international guidelines and standards that are used by many governments around the world to define accessibility of websites and mobile and more, so that people with any kind of disabilities can use these. WAY also reviews all of the technical standards that the World Wide Web Consortium produces and upon which the web is built to ensure that these support accessibility. So those include things like standards for media, standards for payments, standards for things like virtual reality. So we get a chance to review all of those to ensure that they support accessibility. We also develop resources to improve evaluation of web accessibility. We develop use cases that help explain to web developers how people with disabilities, with different kinds of disabilities, use the web, because a lot of people who develop technical standards, products, and services just don't know how we as people with disabilities are using these digital technologies. We develop educational resources as well that are freely available online and that we really hope that you all will check out. There are many ways to participate in WAY work, and we hope you will feel very welcome to join us. We would like to increase dialogue and engagement with communities interested in digital accessibility across Africa. We look forward to working with Irene and all the attendees of the conference if you're interested in learning how to help advance web accessibility even more worldwide. I wish you the best with your work on web accessibility. I want to thank you again, Irene, for this brief opportunity to extend my greetings before I now must unfortunately run to another event. It's all virtual, but I'm supposed to be in a different place also. I leave you in good hands with Shadi and the panelists and Irene's efforts on this webinar. Thank you so much. Best wishes.
Thank you so much, Judy. We look forward to working together. I think the one thing I want to say is that it's important for people to understand that the Web Accessibility Consortium has been doing some amazing work, and that you have amazing resources on accessibility, because most people, especially in the continent, tend to think that web accessibility is something very new, but it's just that people have not been sharing the information in Africa. Yet we're developing all these websites and communicating using all these websites. So I would encourage everyone, go online, www to the WC3C website, and find some resources of how you can actually make your web assets accessible. So thank you, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Today. Fantastic.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Next, I will give an opportunity to our speakers. We have Shadi, we have Wilson, we have Femi, and we have Bunmi. Shadi will tell you he's from Egypt and Vienna. Wilson is from Kenya and South Africa. We have Bunmi and Femi, both from Nigeria. So the whole idea is really to understand the landscape in Africa when it comes to web accessibility, and really how it also affects our users. And today is the one webinar where we actually have 4 panelists who are also users of, who can really talk about real experiences on web accessibility. So as you introduce yourselves, the one question I want you to answer, you just need to give your name, where you are from, and what you do. But most importantly, why is web accessibility important to you? If you can tell us why it's important to you, then we can move on to the next one. Shadi?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. Great to be here. Web accessibility for me is just the right thing. It's important to be inclusive for everyone, in particular, making sure there's no discrimination to people with disabilities.
Excellent. Wilson?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Wilson Masharia. I am a lawyer and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, currently situated in South Africa at the Center for Human Rights. I'm undertaking a master's. So personally, web accessibility is important for me because in simple terms, it makes things possible for me, because things that I'm not able to access physically, then often, most of the time, I go to access it from the web. It's even more important for my career, especially during a time like this where most of the systems and services have moved online.
Excellent, thank you. Bunmi? Bunmi, I think you're on mute. Oh, no. Hello, Bunmi? Okay, let's have Femi, and then we can check on Bunmi. Femi, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, let me turn off my talk back.
Okay.
Because the text on a screen is disturbing my hearing.
No problem.
My name is Olufemi Esebayode from Nigeria. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Special Learning Needs Consultant. I'm an author, I'm a teacher, and as well as technology enthusiast right here in Nigeria. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Tell us why web accessibility is important for you.
Okay, web accessibility is quite important to me as an individual, because it makes life so much easy when surfing with the internet. You can quickly get to what you are searching for, what you are looking for on a website, and it makes surfing experience much more interesting. And as a matter of fact, it can easily put you at the same edge with persons with a site that is a sighted individual. Maybe you are given a particular task. So the number of times that how we use won't be all that different from that of person with sight. And then it will make learning also much more easy for me, as in the experience won't will be boring. Imagine you trying to look for something on the side that you have to click here, and you are being returned back to the top, of which you have to go a couple of times down before you get what you are looking for. So it makes things easy, accessible, and interesting. So that's it.
Yeah, I think one thing you've said that's really important to note is that web accessibility also helps improve user experience, which is very, very critical for all users. At the same time, when we talk about web accessibility, all we're trying to say is the same information that someone is trying to provide to people without disabilities should be available to people with disabilities in the same way. That's all we're trying to say when we talk about digital accessibility. Excellent. So we'll move on to our subject matter expert, Shadi, who's well experienced and who actually works for the World Wide Web Consortium. And he can take us through some of what is web accessibility and everything that we need to know. Shadi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Irene. Shikamo, everyone, formally. So, yeah, so as Judy has introduced before, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, is a technical standards body. But I really want to emphasize here, and let me just make sure that I have the possibility to, sorry, just give me a second to make sure I can move the slides. Yes, I can. Yeah, I want to take the people's view of web accessibility. No matter how technical we get, we really have to remember it is about people. As Irene was saying, it's about people being able to access technologies in the same way, have equivalent access, and that people are not excluded due to their disability. So just to make some concrete examples, sorry, the slides are not always moving forward when I would like them to. So an example of accessibility in the digital space are people with auditory, with hearing, different types of hearing disabilities. And as we have here in this conference today, we don't only have captioning, we also have sign language. This is really important accommodation for people with certain types of disabilities. And as the digital technologies evolve, we see more audiovisual content on the web, things that are videos or podcasts, things like this, that also need to be accessible. Another type of disabilities is cognitive and learning disabilities. And this is a really, really broad spectrum. It covers things such as dyslexia, where people, said very simply, the eyes switch around maybe the letters, so their reading capabilities are sometimes need special learning, and sometimes when they hear what's on the screen and see it at the same time, their reading improves, or by changing how text is presented can be helped by reading, and many types of other cognitive and learning disabilities that can be helped by an intuitive design. Physical disabilities, people with different kinds of physical disabilities who may not be able to use their arms, for example, to move the mouse or to type on the keyboard, might be using speech input or other kinds of devices to control the computer. Many different types of visual disabilities, again here ranging from using text output, text to speech, to be able to hear what's on the screen, but also vibration, as we just heard, and other mechanisms to access the content. As we all grow older, we also develop age-related impairments, and we skipped a slide on an older person using computers. There's sometimes a bit of a myth that older people don't use digital technology, but also younger people. It's imperative nowadays to be able to have computer skills and digital skills, and accessibility is just as essential for them. So, as was said also by Irene in the introduction, there are over 80 million people with disabilities in Africa. Around the world, over 1.2 billion people. It's recognized as the world's largest minority. About 15 to 20% of the population have some form of a disability. So just to see how incredible, how important that is. Very often people with disabilities belong to the most marginalized groups and most vulnerable groups in their societies. So again, here, having accessibility is not only a matter of good to have, it's actually essential. It allows education, it allows employment, it allows participation in everyday life. And it's often compounded with other intersectionality aspects. For example, affording digital technologies, affording bandwidth, literacy, many different aspects that come together that affect accessibility beyond the disability that a person that exists. I also want to mention just very briefly that access to information is recognized by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as a human right. This is really important to remember, as Irene was saying earlier. This is not something new. This is an established human right. We need to address accessibility. We need to get it implemented. Moving beyond the direct relevance for people, which is already important enough, the topic has also come forward from other speakers before, is additional benefits of accessibility, the business benefit beyond just people with disabilities who are already a large group. And the slides are not moving forward again. I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. So years ago, Microsoft as a business did a study to look at the relevance of accessibility on their computer operating system, why they should invest in accessibility. And they saw that around 15 to 20% of the population needs the accessibility features, but that nearly 2/3 benefit from this accessibility features. Very similar to a ramp. Not only wheelchair users use a ramp. When we're pushing a trolley, when we're pushing a tram, when we have luggage, when we have a broken leg, many, many more people use accessibility features and don't even think of it as accessibility features. Digital assistants nowadays, where the computer is talking to you and it's becoming more and more normal, was actually an accessibility feature for many decades for people with disabilities. So what I want to highlight here is the innovative power and the benefits of accessibility for everyone. This includes also for mobile design. There are many overlaps here. Sometimes if you cannot see a screen because it's so small, or because you have lower visual acuity, very similar use cases very often. So when you design a website to be accessible, it works better on mobile, it works better for many people. People with lower language skills and digital skills, and also for increasing average age that in many of our populations where the average age or the life expectancy is thankfully increasing, and where we need to keep accessibility for those among us who are getting older. I will stop here for now, and I think we're going to come back later. Actually, we have one more slide. On just introducing very, very briefly, this is as technical as I will get today, I promise. I was asked not to get too technical. But it is important to also highlight that there is an internationally recognized standard called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. WCAG specifies specific criteria of what accessibility means. We've seen examples before, like for example, providing captions or providing sufficient color contrast, or providing text alternatives for images. Many examples of accessibility that I can use the computer by keyboard or by voice interfaces. These are the kinds of criteria that are provided here for developers in this standard. And this standard has been adopted internationally by many governments. It's also an ISO standard, the International Standards Organization, which is a worldwide standards institution, has adopted, has recognized the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also in Europe and in many other parts of the world. So the point that I want to make here, without getting too technical, is that there are also technical standards. And later on, when we come to close, I will be showing you some of the resources that we have on how to actually implement the standard in practice in different kinds of settings. I think that's it for me for now, and back to you, Irene.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much, Shadi. Something that's important for people to note is that when you deal with web accessibility, when you develop an accessible website, you actually serve everybody. So everyone tends to benefit. Think about people in low bandwidth area. When I think about Africa, which is home to me, most people are in low bandwidth areas. So it's important that people, including businesses, governments, consider making sure that their websites are accessible to everyone. Thank you. And I think we're going to take another quick poll just to see what feedback we get. And the question is, does your country have a law or provide guidance on web accessibility? I'll repeat again. Does your country have a law or provide guidance on web accessibility? Please check your phones, or if you're using a laptop, just check for that. And the answer is either yes, no, or I'm not sure. And then we'll give you just 30 seconds and we see what feedback we get. Okay, let's see. So 27% say yes, that their countries have a law or they provide some sort of guidance on web accessibility. 27% say no, and 47% say they're not sure. So thank you so much for participating in the poll, and we will proceed to the next step. So now we'll move on to the next step, which is the Q&A section for our panelists. And I think I want to start off with Bunmi because we didn't hear from her. Bunmi, are you there? I'm suspecting Bunmi is having technical issues because we spoke to her. She was on the panel before we started. So I'll move on to the next question, which will go to Femi. As a special education consultant who is totally blind, what web accessibility barriers have you come across in the Nigerian education system?
Hello, can you come again?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So as a special education consultant who is totally blind, what web accessibility barriers have you come across in Nigeria, in the Nigerian education system?
One is inaccessible website, but there are so many websites within this sense that are crowded with a lot of ads, which are most annoying, that we have to scroll through before you get to see what you are looking at. And most educational websites don't have a good landmarks. As a person with visual impairments, there are major keystrokes that we use to move by headings or by particular landmarks. But you just will see a website but the only option you have is to use the regular navigation keys, which is the arrow keys. And what you are looking for is somewhere towards the bottom of the page, which means you have to scroll down with your arrow key a couple of times before you see what you are looking for. And another annoying thing in some of these web-based sites are these images, or too many images with no text, or to let you know what is in those images, or without proper labeling. I think those are some of the major ones that we encounter here in Nigeria. And let me also try to point out these too, because most Nigerians with visual impairment as of today are more of mobile phone users to computer as users. So there are sites that you can visualize very well. I mean, you can access properly using your computer system. But when you get to your phone, you won't have a good a better experience using your phone, so the page tends to be lagging while browsing with your phone or to access sorry website, because it's like there is no mobile version of those websites here in Nigeria. I think these are some of the things. And or these mobile phones too, they also have their own screen reader that we depend on to access website. So you have to just rely on the sighted individual to help you do what you want to do on the website.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Femi. I think you brought up an important point that when websites are not accessible, they make you depend on somebody else to access information. Yet you're a very independent human being. So I think it's critical for web designers, web developers, business owners to understand the need to make the users very, very independent. So, and that's what web accessibility does. You make your website accessible. Femi, Wilson, anybody else will independently use the website without having to consult or get some help. So thank you so much for that feedback. Wilson, I have a quick one for you. How important is it for people with disabilities to access government information and services online? And of course, you can speak about Kenya or you can speak about South Africa, where you are. It's up to you.
Yeah, so I thank you very much for that question. I think it cuts, this applies to every person with a disability, regardless of where they come from, because the basic purpose or reason why most people or most stakeholders have adopted web accessibility or web or online products and services is to bring products and services closer to the people, or as people say, in your sitting room. So the worst part is where website accessibility is not put into consideration. It is another way of bringing exclusion closer to the homes of people who have disabilities. So the paradox is, for a very long time, we've had people complaining about inaccessible physical infrastructure. Somebody with a wheelchair cannot access a certain place. Somebody who is visually impaired cannot walk alone. And in most cases, the response to that or the recommendation that was given to that was, let us do it online. Let us bring these services closer to the people. But web accessibility then, if it's not put into consideration, it becomes like a second wave of excluding persons with disabilities.
Excellent, thank you so much. Do you have any specific government service that you feel for you needs to be, maybe you've tried to use and it doesn't work? Maybe you can give us a real example.
Yes, thank you very much. So, well, it's a very important time to have this conversation, because most Kenyans would know that this is the time or the deadline for filing our returns is drawing closer. We have to file our returns by the end of the month of June, whether you earn a living, a salary or not, whether it's nil returns or otherwise. So unfortunately, the website which I am supposed to do this from is very inaccessible for persons, more so those who use screen readers like myself, those who are visually impaired. And when we talk about website accessibility, I look at it from three perspectives. There are those websites which you can access with difficulty. There are those websites which you cannot access at all. And then there are those websites which you can access but hit a dead end when you're just about to submit. So the unfortunate thing about the iTax website, which is run by the Kenya Revenue Authority in Kenya, is that if I am not able to file my returns by the deadline, I'm going to be slapped with a very big fine. And of course, once you complain that the website is not accessible for me, and that's why I was not able to file the return, it's a system-generated penalty. So unfortunately, there's nothing we can do.
Okay, okay. And I want to clarify, for those who don't know what it means to say a return, it's really tax returns. Filing your taxes at the end of the year is a major requirement. So thank you so much. And I hope maybe we have some government officials on the line who will at least learn something from this experience and maybe reach out to see how they can make some of their websites accessible to all citizens in Kenya and other places. Excellent. So the next question is Buni. Buni, are you back? Can you hear me? So I tend to think we've lost her completely, but if Bunmi comes back, we would definitely love for her to speak. She had quite some information she wanted to share. Shadi, do you want to add something to the conversation right now, please?
Well, maybe share a personal story. I don't often do that. So I was 16 when I became disabled. I became a quadriplegic, so have limited use of my arms. And it was only through digital technology that I was really able to finish my school and complete my education. Or start actually in education, formal education. And this is maybe how I got into digital accessibility and digital technology and realized how important it is, how what a big difference it makes, and where sometimes things that were not accessible would block. So maybe we covered government, we covered the view of a teacher, maybe also the view of well, not anymore student, but really the education system and the importance here to actually be able to become a full participant of society.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I think we will go back to, let me see if we can. I will ask one. Femi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me also?
Yes, I can. So
hello.
If you,
good.
Okay, excellent. So if you're to choose just one website in your country, Nigeria, that can be made accessible to you, that's really important maybe because of the services that you receive, which website would that be and what type of services do you get, do you receive from that website?
My website, it will be Obasanjo Presidential Library, OPL. And what the service of the render is there where you get to access different books and then journals from the website. The website will get what is so that will be a website I will look forward to have made accessible.
Fantastic, thank you. I think what most people might not know is that people with disabilities read a lot. So it's important to make sure the books, the journals, any digital content that we have is fully accessible. And as we've said, the standards are there, they're global standards, the resources are free. So it's important for people to know where to go. We will be providing some resources. Actually, Shadi will do that. We'll give some information on that. So that we can ensure that most of these services we offer are accessible to everyone. The other question I have for you is, Wilson, for you, which service do you think is most critical for you at this point, or which website do you feel you would want to have full access to in Kenya or in South Africa, whichever?
Yeah, so I think so far, the most important website, of course, there are very many important websites depending on what service or product one wants to access. But there's one called eCitizen back home in Kenya, where it's like a one-stop shop for most of the services that you can get from the government. So as a way of being independent, and I think the main purpose of designing this website was to ensure that people are able to access services easier and faster and more independently. So it would be very important if accessibility standards are also put in place to ensure that if Wilson wants to apply for a passport, a new passport, then he can easily do so. If somebody else who has physical disability and can only operate the computer using one hand wants to do so, then it gives them capability or even enough time to fill in the dots or the questions that are raised there, because sometimes some websites refresh so quickly. If I can add a little more, is you see, during this COVID-19 era, most people want to access information more or less also about the pandemic, how many people are, how the infections are going and all that. I once tried to use the website Ministry of Health from Kenya, and it showed me a graph, which, as you know, would be very difficult for me to access. I have tried that here in South Africa, South Africa SA Corona. That one is pretty accessible. It seems they did a good job when they were designing it. But this one also applies not only for South Africa and Kenya, but also the world, because they are also the global statistics. So there are people who realize that most of the information was being presented in graph form. And as now I have seen people designing new websites which are in text format that even screen readers like what I use can access.
Thank you so much, Will. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Wilson. Actually, that's a really, really interesting discussion because there's so much communication going on about COVID. And for most of us, even if you're on WhatsApp groups or anything, you receive a lot of PDFs and images, but very, very important information. The reality is that information is not accessible to people with disabilities. So it's actually we are actually leaving out people who would need this information the most. So it also brings me back, Wilson, one of our participants during the last webinar on understanding digital accessibility brought up the issue of banking services, and especially because everything now is online, and you're avoiding to go to the bank and all this stuff. And he mentioned how for him it's so important for the web and mobile applications to be accessible so that you're not relying on somebody else to do your own banking. It's a very private service. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that most people can realize that there are solutions out there. We just need to look out or ask, and we can support you. So next, I'll hand over to Shadi so that he can tell us where can we find this information, because this is a very new topic to some of us.
Yes, thank you, Irene. As the first poll showed, there was maybe roughly a third who knew where to get information. Maybe a third was unsure and a third didn't know. So maybe 2/3 are unsure or don't know where to get information. But I want to just clarify one point that was earlier from Wilson, which I think is really, really important. Accessibility does not mean removing graphics and images. You can make these accessible. Actually, graphics and images make content accessible for certain types of other disabilities, people who need the visual information, but they can be, this is what we call text alternatives. I promise not to get technical, but you can provide textual alternative that get read out loud to somebody who doesn't see the images. This also helps, by the way, that you don't have to download the images. You can just download the textual description. This saves a lot of bandwidth. Similar also for captioning and other things. So these text alternatives are not only for accessibility, they also help search engines index your websites and so on. So this was just a minor point of clarification, just so you can imagine what accessibility means for those of you who are new. There are many, many resources that are around. I really recommend it's as Irene was saying much earlier, this has been ongoing for quite some years in some countries. There's meanwhile quite a lot of very good resources. I will introduce some of the resources that we have directly on our website. that are freely available for everyone. These will also be sent out, the URL for the website will be sent out later by email, and you'll find them as well in the chat. We have a set when you go to our website, and I will give you the URL in just a bit, but to not distract you so that you stay with me. On this website, you're gonna find, for example, a series of very, very short videos. We have 10 videos, each of them in less than a minute, and they explain one of the accessibility features. What does keyboard compatibility means? That means using the computer just with a keyboard. For example, if you cannot use the arm. What does text-to-speech means? What does voice recognition mean? In just very, very simple, and in less than a minute, to try to outline what is accessibility. If you're new to digital accessibility, I really recommend that to kind of get an impression. And for each of these features, it's described how it impacts people with disabilities, but also how it benefits many more people, as we said earlier. Again, I'm trying to switch slides. Another resource that I really love, sorry, I went the slide too far. Sarah, can you help and move a slide back, please? If you can do that. Yeah, another resource that I really love that you can find from our website is called the Before and After Demo. It's a small mini website, very small, just an example website with 4 pages. You have the home page, a news page, a tickets page, and so on. You can switch between an accessible and inaccessible version right there. So there's a menu bar, and then you can switch between the accessible and non-accessible to show you that you don't have to change how a website looks like. A lot of the accessibility is actually really done under the hood, really in the coding and some minimal visual tweaks. You can make a website that looks appealing or looks the way you want it to look, but is accessible. It's all about the design, how you choose to design things. Another really cool feature I find with this website is a so-called show annotations function. So you press a button and it will show you with small inserts on the screen, if you're in the accessible ones, which problems there are on this page, and then you can click on these individual items and read about, okay, what was the problem here? Why is this a problem? And on the accessible one, it will show you how that was fixed. So if you're getting a little bit more technical, if you now are a designer or a developer and you want to learn more, okay, how do I do the actual coding? This, I think, is a great learning resource. You can practice there a lot. You can see examples of good coding or good implementations and examples of bad. And please follow the good examples, not the bad ones. And then finally, next slide, please, Sarah. Is a free online course that we just launched since end of January. So it's been running for 3 months now. It's completely free, available, taught by international trainers from around the world on a basic introduction to web accessibility. Well, it's not so basic because it does assume about 4 to 5 weeks. So around 20 hours of work. So it's a real class. But here you'll learn all the basics of accessibility, but also first steps in the guidelines, in these criteria that I introduced earlier. What do they mean? How can you maybe do some checks yourself? Even if you're not a very technical person, there are some things that you can check for yourself and get a bit of an idea. Is this website, is my website good? Is it bad? And you can do some of these checks yourself. So it's really a very good entry into accessibility. It also provides you with many, many more information about many more resources. So if you really want to get into accessibility, I recommend this course because it brings everything together. And if you don't have too much time, if you don't want to do the whole course, maybe you can skip through to certain sections that you're really interested in. For example, the last section on where you can get more information. Maybe you want to focus on that, or you want to focus just on that section of how to implement and so on. Good. So last slide about where the actual website is that I had not announced earlier. The URL, the homepage address is w3.org/WAI. If you type that in your browser, you should get to the homepage of the Web Accessibility Initiative, w3.org/WAI, and you will find these links, as I said, that will be provided later on also in email to this free online training and to the standards and guidelines and other resources that I introduced. Thank you. Back to you, Irene.
I'm so sorry I was on mute. So thank you so much, Shadi, for sharing that information. We will definitely be sharing a recorded video that will have the resources that Shadi just mentioned. So we only have about 10 minutes, and I want to make sure at least each one of you gets a question. So I have a question for Wilson. Wilson, we have someone who's asking, with COVID-19 here and digital tech taking over the world with all this, with all the services that are going on, the person is asking, what do you think about electronic voting, and is it possible for Africa to focus on electronic voting?
Well, so I would give that answer from two perspectives. So I don't know whether that question is to me as a lawyer or as a person with a disability. But basically, actually, just to make it in context of the conversation that we are having today, I think electronic voting should be adapted increasingly so by different countries. I'm sure, well, as we all know, it has been tried and tested. To some extent it has failed, to some extent there are challenges, and other times it works. But one of the package that it will actually bring would be that it would bring that service closer to persons with disabilities. Because one of the challenges that people face when exercising this democratic, when this right and duty to vote is, as a person with visual impairment, for instance, I have to go with someone all the time to, make my choice of the candidate I want to choose or the policy or law that I want to make a decision on. Those of us, those who have used wheelchairs, those who have physical disabilities, those who have other kinds of disabilities to some extent cannot even participate in that. So if it would be brought on a digital platform, and such digital online platforms are made fully accessible, then it would make it not only easier, but possible for persons with disabilities.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that question. We have another one for Shadi. Could you give an example of an accessible or a Wcag compliant website that we can benchmark? We can use as a benchmark for.
Well,
I know that's a good one.
There isn't such a ranking, but there are good examples out there. There isn't one rank, and as you know, websites change very quickly. We do our most, of course, to try to make our own website as accessible as possible. So you can see a lot of examples there, also images and videos and how to make these accessible. All the videos that we have, for example, all the images, all the content on the w3.org/WAI website. But there are many others out there. I would search. Some websites actually have an accessibility statement. It's increasing. In some countries, it's actually a requirement that they provide an accessibility statement in many European countries. So this might be a way. You can search by accessibility statements, and then you can look at these websites, and some websites really describe very well. It's a matter of also setting an expectation. You don't always have to be perfect, but if you can explain where there are problems and what you're still working on, that sets expectations also for users. So it's not always just a binary yes or no, but you can also do many things in the interim period while you are on the road to becoming more accessible.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And there's one myth I would like to clarify. And I think one of them you already clarified. Some people think when you make your website accessible, it's only for people with disabilities or it's only for blind people. So that you have clarified, and thank you so much. The other piece is that some people think that, or some businesses, when you make your website accessible at the onset, that's it. You don't need until another 3-4 years, then you come back again. The reality is that web accessibility is a process. It needs to begin from when you're planning to design that website, from the requirements to the designing, to you come back when you're developing, when you're testing, and until the end of it. But at the same time, you still need continuous monitoring because you make a quick update, something breaks. So it's important for us to know that as you continue to update your website, you have to continuously test for accessibility. So accessibility is part of the process of that project. So thank you so much for clarifying that. I think we have Femi, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Do you have an example of maybe one website that you think is pretty good in Nigeria that you normally use that at least is somewhat good? It doesn't have to be perfect. There's nothing like perfect, but it's pretty user friendly for you.
Yeah, no, if you talk about Nigerian websites that we use, that is a bit better. Let me say, and if I want to do a comparison, I will say like some schools that have checked, yes, I may try to pick or Unilag, but it's not everyone that actually visits for that site. Or let me say Jumia. I think Jumia is a bit better. It's a bit better with an online shopping mall.
Yeah.
It's a bit better. It's a bit better.
Okay.
Jumia is a bit better. And it's widely used by most persons with visual impairment in Nigeria, being blind in Nigeria. Yeah. Jumia is okay.
Okay. Excellent.
But they still have a lot to do. I said,
sorry,
there's
you can finish.
Still so much to do, yes, on the site. But at least on an average rating, I can say at least 57-60%.
Okay, excellent. I ask our participants to please give us 5 more minutes and we will wrap up. We have several questions. We'll take one more and then we wrap up. I think the next one, I have to say this, Shadi, we've had a number of technical questions. And it can get overwhelming, especially depending on who we have on the phone. So there's one question someone has asked, if the accessibility guidelines are followed for web design on computer, for web design, does it mean that the website is also accessible on mobile? So of course the answer is no, but I'd like you to get a bit deeper into web and web mobile accessibility so that people can understand. Then I'll have a follow-up, one more question for you that's a bit technical, and then we wrap up.
Okay, well, I would rephrase that question on web and mobile to say, if you turn that around and have a user-centered design, start from your user. Don't start with the guidelines and add things, add standards and say, okay, I'll add mobile and I'll add this, start from the user. What does your user need? And this will decide if you're designing mobile first or desktop first. That is always a big debate when you're designing, and you have to make that choice. And accessibility fits in throughout. And as Irene was saying, we need to think of accessibility not as an add-on or as something separate or something that is done at the end or done once and then you check off your checkbox, but that is integrated throughout the design, development, and maintenance life cycle, We have now software as a service, websites, and electronic content, also mobile apps are dynamic. They get updated, they change, they are living things. And so just like you need to consider security and privacy and all these things horizontally across your entire process, you also need to include accessibility throughout your design process. And then the question will come back to you. It's up to you. Do you want your your website to also work on mobile, yes or no? And accessibility will be a natural part of that, whatever your design choice is.
Excellent. And then the other question that I'd like you to take is on what type, do you have any resources for developers on your website so that they know what applications to use, what to do? That's a question that came across. And that's as technical as I want to get.
Yes, we have a lot of resources for developers. We have tutorials that go deeper in how to do accessible tables or forms or these kinds of things. We are also producing more such resources. And as Judy invited at the very beginning, I would also like to repeat that and extend that invitation. The work that we do at W3C is all open source. It's all done in the open on developer collaborative platforms like GitHub. So you can participate, you can comment. There's a link called getting information, getting news from W3C, from WAY, and you can get latest announcements on things that we publish. You can also find out how to get involved, how to participate, and let us also know your ideas and your needs. One of the things that we want to do is make these resources more available to different countries and different places. Maybe you want to translate some of these resources in Swahili and make it more available to developers in Central Africa. This is definitely something that we'd love to have collaboration on, and there are many opportunities. So feel free to contact me, and I think the contact address will also be provided in the resources later on from the organizer.
Excellent. So we've come to the end of our webinar, and the one thing I want everyone to remember is that Tim Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1989, and his main focus was really in universal access. He wanted the web for everyone and the web for everything. So it's up to us to make sure that our websites are accessible to all people. Thank you so much to amazing panelists for contributing. We've learned a lot from Kenya, from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Egypt, and from the World Wide Web. The recording will be made available on the Inclusive Africa website. You can also sign up for our next webinar on understanding mobile accessibility. And please keep the conversation going beyond today. Follow us at enable.org and use the hashtag A11Y Africa 2020. Thank you so much, and you all have a blessed day.
Asante sana.
Karibu.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you.